Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War news update, second part thereof for the 20th of April 2024. I may have to split recording this and come back to it later due to having to go to family things. But we're going to start with, obviously, what's going on in Congress with regards to the military aid package to Ukraine and indeed Israel, Taiwan and all the other bits and pieces thrown into a fourth bill. So initially there was this unusual situation where the Democrats had to come to the rescue of Republicans in a rules committee so that the thing could be put to vote. You have to work out the rules, and normally it just goes with the majority, but actually 9-3 was a vote where Democrats had to come to the help of the Republicans there, which is, as I say, unusual. Not usually the case, because 3 MAGA Republicans wanted to upset matters there. So, as Adam Kinzinger, former Republican lawmaker, says, this is indeed rare, and kudos to the Democrats. More rare is rules Republicans opposing in the committee. The 3 should be replaced. In other words, these 3 MAGA Republicans presenting such a problem for, you would think, predominantly Ukraine aid is an issue. Democrats help advance Ukraine, Israel aid in a rare rules move, says The Hill. And then what you had is this. So breaking, that's the rules committee. Then you had the rule has passed its floor vote, 311 to 93. So that's fairly overwhelming, which is, I think, this the Ukraine aid will pass fairly convincingly. I think, here's a bit of speculation from me, I think the Ukraine aid package might pass even more easily than the Israel aid package. And here's for why. So let's drill down into the rules agreeing to the resolution with this 311 to 93. So the Republicans, 149. Well, I'm not sure. No, actually, I'll go back on what I said. I think this... I don't know. Actually, no. I might stick with what I said. Okay, shut up, Piss. So Republicans, 140 people said yes, 55 said no, and 14 didn't vote. Democrats, 162 said yes, 38 said no, 13 didn't vote. Agreeing to the resolution and rules for, I presume, all 4 bills, right? But what I think might happen is when the Ukraine bill comes up, I think it will get the majority of Democrats, and the ones that said nay here. The big question is how many Democrats are going to not be up for Israel aid because it's military equipment going to Israel to continue to prosecute the war against what they see as a war against Palestinians, not Hamas, but Palestinians. So the question I have is, are there more Democrats who are not up for Israel aid than there are Republicans not up for Ukraine aid? And I think, although the anti-Ukraine aid, and it's fairly sizable here, 55 voted no, but is that where it's going to stop? And will you get more people not up for Ukrainian aid in the Republicans than people lawmakers not up for Israel aid in the Democratic caucus? I don't know. I think it's going to be fascinating, but my speculation is that both Israel and Ukraine will get through, and indeed Taiwan and the other one as well. I think that I'm really hopeful for that, and as a result, there is the request from Chuck Schumer, the Senate head, that people hang around. So here it is: Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Democrat Senate leader, Majority Leader, said to colleagues that they should be prepared to stay in session through the weekend to finish work on the long stalled package to fund the war in Ukraine, Israel and other emergency security needs. So in other words, when it gets voted on today by the House representatives, if it passes, and I expect it will pass, all 4 to pass, then the Senate needs to ratify those bills as well. And I think they're coming all as one. I think they're somehow going to be tied up all as one package. I'm not sure how that works. Bear in mind that the Senate has already given the go-ahead to the bill that had all of these things in very similar manner, 70 to 29, all the way back in February. So one would assume it would pass in the Senate. And the idea is that Chuck Schumer recognizes how damned important it is to get this stuff to Ukraine. Ukraine, literally every day, is a death knell for many Ukrainian soldiers and civilians, and so it's really important that the U.S. Congress expedites the passage of these bills through both houses, and then the understanding is that Joe Biden would just sign it that night. So, as Nexus says here, today the U.S. House of Representatives will vote on the 4 bills. So that vote isn't a vote on the bills itself; it's a vote on the rules. Aid to Ukraine, Israel and Taiwan, as well as a national security bill. The document includes clauses on the confiscation of Russian assets and their transfer to aid for Ukraine. I don't think that that's the most important part of it, though, because there's only $3 billion worth of frozen Russian assets in the US. Right. So the US president will quickly sign a drawdown authority military aid package for Ukraine as soon as Congress passes a new aid to Ukraine, expected in a week. Well, if it's signed basically tonight, I don't think it'll happen tonight, but if the senators are working on Sunday, tomorrow, and that's passed as soon as possible, then you might get a situation whereby president signs it, I don't know, tomorrow night, maybe, I don't know how timings work and what Senate can do with regard to working on Sunday, etc., or whether they work through Saturday night even, who knows. But what seems to be the case is that, and this has been confirmed by both the Pentagon here saying we can move within days. Pentagon spokesperson Pat Ryder said when asked how quickly the US can send military aid to Ukraine once Congress approves it. And then you've got Karine Jean-Pierre saying the White House expects that the supply of arms to Ukraine will begin immediately after US Congress passes a bill to extend funding for aid. So what I think is that this stuff is ready to go in the logistics hubs in the US, and possibly, as I said in my previous video, in logistics hubs in Europe. So I reckon the US might have been quietly getting stuff out to Germany and Poland and whatnot in ahead of hopefully a congressional bill being passed. And so literally when that bill is signed by Joe Biden, it's a telephone call. Yeah, we're done. Do it. And stuff will start moving into Ukraine. And I think that's really good news. There's lots to discuss concerning Mike Johnson's motivations for eventually getting this done. But once a ball starts rolling, this thing has moved quickly. We'll talk about that in the geopolitical video next. Now, we're going to move away from that US aid. I think, fingers crossed, it will pass. Keep you updated. Breaking news. Germany is considering ordering an additional 4 Patriot batteries from Raytheon on top of the 4 that were already ordered via direct commercial sale last month. The first contract was worth $1.2 billion, and this one would be around $1.3 billion. That's huge. I don't know whether that be into backfilling German stocks or whether they are to go directly to Ukraine. Germany is really stepping up. Yesterday, the CEO of Diehl Defense announced that Germany will deliver another IRIS-T SLM, as I reported yesterday, air defense system to Ukraine in the coming weeks. Germany's ambassador to Ukraine clarified today that this will happen this month. That is April, and we're on 20th of April, so good news. The system was expected to be delivered to Ukraine by the end of winter 2023 to 24. With the upcoming delivery, Germany has delivered a total of 4 IRIS-T SLM. These are decent systems, right? Medium range air defense system to Ukraine. At least 1 additional IRIS-T SLM system will be delivered later this year. So 1 by the end of this month, and then another one coming later this year. I don't know what the production schedule is for Diehl. I don't know how many are on order from other countries for usual kind of nations ordering defense equipment. But yeah, good news that one will be imminently arriving in Ukraine. Then Thales Group, who's another, this time a French military industrial concern, saying that the French Air Force owns 7 SAMP-T systems, these equivalent to Patriots, while the Italian army owns 3 systems. Of the 7 units in service, 1 is permanently stationed in Romania, so these are the 7 French ones. as part of the Eagle mission. 2 others are due to be mobilized during the Olympic Games. So it'd be interesting to see whether any SAMTs can find their way to Ukraine. Macron said yesterday that SAMT systems are used to secure nuclear strangleholds on French soil, or strongholds. And so we can argue that this will be the case for the 4 remaining systems. The deployment of the second Mamba system in Ukraine after the summer would also coincide with the arrival of the additional batch of Asta-30 missiles. So there are the missiles that fire from the SAMT being on order, so they get extra missiles. Don't know exactly where that SAMT is in Ukraine. I presume it's around Kiev, but it might not be. European Investment Bank is allocating $596 million to Ukraine in 2024. That's for a number of different projects. Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister, has been vaunting that. And then we have good news. Denmark has become the first country to buy weapons and equipment for Ukraine's armed forces from a domestic manufacturer as part of a military aid package, Minister of Strategic Industry says. So this is one of these things where that is a country, Denmark in this case, actually sending money outside of Denmark or outside of the EU even. You've got money going to domestic production within Ukraine. So we're going to buy stuff for Ukraine from Ukraine. This is really good news for Ukraine. And actually it's very generous from Denmark because there is less self-interest involved in that kind of exchange. That is money going outside of Denmark and outside of the EU as a whole. But it really will benefit Ukraine because you've got money coming into Ukraine, buying equipment from Ukraine, keeping the wheels turning in their military industrial complex, and that will then keep jobs going. It will keep tax dollars flowing into the coffers of the Ukrainian treasury. So yeah, really good news from Ukraine's point of view. We finally have a number of Jaguar that will be delivered to the French army by June. That's 36 units. These are a replacement to the AMX-10, the wheeled light tank that Ukraine have received from France previously. Now, we've heard from the French that all of their replaced vehicles or pieces of equipment, as they are constantly upgrading and changing their stocks, will be going to Ukraine, or at least be offered to Ukraine first up. So, unsurprisingly, you can expect 36 AMX-10s to be transferred to Ukraine in 2024 as those units come in to replace them in France. The Jaguar is replacing the AMX-10. According to the French army, the Jaguar will replace 248 AMX-10 RC. So that means you could expect 248 of those to go to Ukraine eventually. Now, The Guardian has a lot of people have been talking about this, has come out with an article that's quite condemnatory of the UK in being in charge of a defense fund for Ukraine, and 900 million, almost $1 billion and 900 million pounds of that has been unspent as the MOD is on go slow. So more than half of the £900 million military fund for Ukraine run by the British Ministry of Defence has not been used because of bureaucratic delays in handing out contracts. UK-led International Fund for Ukraine counts 9 countries among its donors. Critics claim its provision of weapons to the front line has been slow. Of the 900 million quid donated by governments over the last 2 years, of which 500 million came from the UK, just 404 million has been spent or committed. Some of the equipment covered in the contract signed will not reach Ukraine till next spring, ministers have admitted. The delays are said by MOD officials to have been caused by a need to assess each of the huge number of defence companies that have tendered for contracts. John Healey, Shadow Defence Secretary, accused the MOD of being on a go slow. He said, quote, "The UK is united in support of Ukraine and against Russian aggression. As Russia steps up its attacks on Ukraine, its allies must accelerate military support. Instead, the UK government is on a go slow in getting crucial new kit into the hands of Ukrainians. Speeding it up would have our Labour backing, as on Britain's military help to Ukraine and on reinforcing NATO allies, the government has had, we will continue to have our fullest Labour support." And this is talking to the idea that Labour are almost certainly going to win the election, probably in November as well. November's a big month for elections. So the UK, you will have, if it's on present polling, like MRP polling, which is constituency by constituency polling in the UK, indicates that the Tory government, 650 MPs in our parliament, and the Tories have a majority, an outright majority. We used to have broadly a two-party system, sort of three-party, but now and so therefore, you would have majority governments, either Labour, it would swing from Labour to Tory. We had a coalition government in 2010 with the Lib Dems because there wasn't quite enough, and now we're seeing Greens, Lib Dems, obviously Labour, Conservative, and then Reform, who've kind of replaced UKIP, and then you have Plaid Cymru in Wales, SNP in Scotland. Northern Ireland has their own MPs, and many don't come down and sit in, or certainly Sinn Féin ones don't come and sit in Westminster. Anyway, now we've got a more plural landscape that we could have more coalitions, and in fact that was the main way of Labour getting back in, because they'd lost so much in Scotland and SNP had taken over in Scotland. SNP are having a bit of a rough time at the moment with some controversies, so you might see some gains in Scotland for Labour. And as I say, the MRP has a conservative polling, has the Conservatives taking less than 100 seats out of 650. Holy crap, that is an absolute landslide massacre. Now, it will tighten up as we get towards November, but Labour will get in. There's like 99% chance of that happening. The good news is that with Labour getting in, there looks to be no change at all in our approach to Ukraine. So there is full bipartisan support for Ukraine. It is completely different to American politics in that regard. So across the parties, we support Ukraine. You might see a little bit of dodginess in the Reform end of things, but otherwise, it's generally bipartisan support for Ukraine across the landscape in the UK. But that money needs to be spent. Okay, Airbus Defence and Space CEO Michael Schulhorn questions the assessment of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on Taurus missile transfer to Ukraine. Quote, if there was a desire to supply the missiles, we would have found technological solutions for using Taurus in Ukraine without German participation. Scholz justifies the impossibility of transferring missiles to Kyiv from the political side of the problem. So we've had many different excuses from Scholz. One of them was, I don't want German people on the ground. Technologically, we'll have to have German people. And this guy saying, well, look, really, if we wanted tourists to get to Ukraine, we really wanted it to get to Ukraine, we'd have found all the solutions to those issues. And therefore, it's a political decision. It is not a technological decision. You could say military political decision, as in strategic military, but no, there you go. Russia fears a new Neptune missiles under development by Ukraine. So these are the anti-ship missiles. Well, certainly originally, one that took down the Moskva, sunk the Moskva, was a Neptune missile. And there's the idea that they have now been adapted to fire 1,000 kilometers and have a fairly significant warhead, I think. Lower cross-section, lower altitude flight path, extended range, and no escalation management to follow. So apparently, I'm not going to go into it, but the Russians are worried. I'm not going to go into it because I can't speak. Oh, no, here's the translation. Are worried about this weapon. And I think with good reason. So if we start seeing 1,000-kilometer indigenously created missiles fired by the Ukrainians, you are going to see targets taken out inside Russia. And that is a worry for the Russians, good for the Ukrainians. Albania is looking for investors to relaunch production at 3 Cold War era ammunition plants. In the past, they produce a wide variety of munitions, including small arms and mortar rounds. This is incredibly good news for Ukraine because Soviet era stuff, as long as that stuff goes to Ukraine, it could go to Russia, right? Albania is in a very precarious position in the Balkans, surrounded by countries who arguably are moving towards or have moved towards Russia's sphere of influence. But Albania courts NATO investors to revive those plants, good for their economy and good for Ukraine, particularly those mortar rounds, right? Mortar rounds are relatively easy to make compared to artillery rounds, but you need absolute bucket load of them. Ukraine really wants to be firing. Andrew Perpetua talks about this all the time, saying they need millions of rounds a month of mortar rounds, because that is the workhorse of your infantry. That's how you attack or even defend. In your day, that's just the bread and butter of infantry maneuvers is mortar, use of mortar. And Ukraine just need so many more mortar rounds. That's good news there, potentially. And more good news on the artillery front. Slovaks, angered by their government's refusal to give artillery aid to Ukraine's fight against Russian invasion, have raised nearly 2 million euros now. So it was, I think, 1.2 million euros. Now nearly 2 million. That's $2.13 million and counting this week in a drive to supply artillery ammunition to Kiev. So this is Slovakian people raising money for the Czech ammunition initiative because their government won't, because their government is so pro-Russia. That's fantastic. Really good stuff. Right, 18 modular bridges under the World Bank's RELINC project are already in Ukraine. This is a quick solution to restore logistics for the frontline regions. It's stuff like this, and I've said this to you 100 times. When you hear news like this, you're wondering who is doing this for Russia. Now, China, and we'll go on to this in a second, are helping Russia a lot. But the international institutions like the World Bank, like the EU, different banks within the EU, you've got your reconstruction banks and so on and so forth. Or you've got the IMF, you've got all these different institutions giving stuff to Ukraine. What's the equivalent with Russia? Is there an organisation that has provided 18 modular bridges for the Russian army or the Russian population in occupied territories? No, the Ukrainian population. Well, a mix of both, right? So the total cost of this batch is more than $23 million. Purchase was made by UNOPS and the UN Office for Project Services. So that's the UN getting on board and helping Ukraine here. I thank all partners, says Kuprikov, for their support, and together with the Restore Ukraine, we are working on the recovery and resilience of Ukraine. Just as a complete aside, Grant Shapps here kind of announcing the last 8th Challenger 3 prototype has rolled off the Rheinmetall plant's assembly line and is already demonstrating its capabilities in tests. Now the tank is going to go into mass production. A total of 140 units are to be built. The Challenger 3 is armed with a 120mm L55A1 smoothbore gun. So they've gone from, this is a British main battle tank, going from a rifled gun to a smoothbore gun to go in line with NATO. That can fire most NATO shells. The tank has a speed of 60 kilometers an hour and is equipped with a new composite armor package known as Epson, as well as a trophy active protection system. So going to be pretty decent, pretty heavy bit of kit, which is a drawback for some of these modern NATO tanks. Not a huge number of these getting built. I don't know what the export potential is for these to other countries. The why I'm including this is I don't know what effect this will have on whether we can release any more Challenger 2s to Ukraine. There's the idea that we've given them a 14, although some claiming 22, some claiming 28, that we've given them some on a sly. Nonetheless, we've given them a small number, but we don't have that many because we don't have that many. Okay, now going on to Russian production. There are no production of new T-80s in Russia, only restoration of old T-80s apparently. On the screenshot of the video, you can clearly see what these vaunted T-80 BVMs are riveted from. Production of tank is a Russian propaganda narrative taken up by Russophile experts in the West. On Transmash plant from a propaganda video. Now, speaking of which, so this is the idea that they aren't making new T-80s, they are just refurbishing old ones. We have Russia ramps up weapons production using mass quantity to outgun Ukraine, says the Washington Post. Quoting from that, and quoting from Nikolai Kulbaka, a Russian economist, Russia is not producing more of its modern fighting equipment, but it has been making a lot more of simpler working equipment, rifles, shells, mass weapons for mass soldiers. Russia has rearmed its forces by refurbishing existing gear, much of it dating to the Soviet era. Replacement parts from China, North Korea and Iran are of inconsistent quality, experts said, but procuring them has demonstrated Moscow's ability to circumvent sanctions. The Soviet-era equipment, including missiles and guided aerial bombs, has compensated for Russia's failure, at least so far, to produce and deploy new advanced weapons such as the T-14 Armata tank, which could theoretically rival the US-made Abrams and German-made Leopards that the West has given Ukraine, except it can't because it's rubbish. US officials initially believed the war in Ukraine had seriously degraded Russia's military, but General Christopher G. Cavoli, the US top commander in Europe, testified in Congress this month that Moscow now had more soldiers than at the start of the invasion, and its armed forces have shown an accelerating ability to learn and adapt to battlefield challenges both tactically and technologically. Yeah, I don't think, though, that claim was said anything about the Russian production capabilities. Late last year, Russian President Putin approved a record increase of military spending for 2024, planning to spend around $115 billion, nearly a third of the country's total annual budget, and double the amount allocated for the military in 2021, the year before the invasion of Ukraine. In recent months, top Russian officials, including Defense Minister Shoigu, have claimed record numbers, reporting to Putin that the military-industrial complex has quadrupled production of armoured vehicles, quintupled the supply of tanks, and boosted manufacturing of drones and artillery shells by nearly 17 times. Of course, this is coming from the Russians themselves. Do not trust what the Russians say, and that's kind of part of the issue here is like, well, these are coming from Russian figures. So these numbers, including, and it says here, including a claim that 1,500 tanks were built in 2023, cannot be verified because the government does not disclose statistics about military production and the costs of the war, and because the military often uses creative accounting, conflating new and rebuilt materiel to show positive results. Quote, my impression is that Shoigu's numbers and the figure of 1,500 tanks supplied over 2023 is technically correct, but it also includes refurbished stuff, says Michael Gierstad, land warfare analyst from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, a London-based think tank. Quote, there could also be a percentage of tanks that are being cannibalized and their parts be used to make other tanks, which could also be added to this statistics. Gierstad said he believes Russia can manufacture up to 330 tanks a year, but is actually building half that. Still, Russia managed to replenish about 1,140 tanks, and it's estimated to have lost in 2023 by dusting off and refurbishing old tank armor taken from storage. Experts note that the supply of existing gear is limited, and that a key challenge for Russia is to develop capacity to build new fighting vehicles when it runs out of old models to upgrade. The new hull for the T-80 tank was built decades ago. Instead, Russia has gutted and refurbished hundreds that were made more than 50 years ago. But in the autumn, Russian military commanders ordered a renewal of production at Omsk Transmash, short for Omsk Transport Engineering Plant, where the T-80 is built. It goes on to say later, Gierstad said Russia has sought to offset supplies of advanced Western equipment to Ukraine by prioritising quantity and allocating better tanks to better trained units, while supplying older T-55 and T-62 machines to units composed of conscripts and ex-convicts. To increase supply, Russia struck a deal with Iran to set up a factory for Shahed drones in Tatarstan, about 500 miles east of Moscow, and has pushed for a major increase in production of Russia's Lancet self-detonating drone, manufactured by a subsidiary of Russian arms giant Kalashnikov concern. Quote, they've been converting old shopping centres into drone production facilities where they're apparently able to scale up the production quite a bit, said Fabian Hintz, a drone expert with IISS. Russia doesn't have to become the most innovative army in the world, Hintz added. If they managed to get a few systems that work well, like the Lancet, and then they managed to just brutally force through production, that's already dangerous enough. Russia has sought basic raw materials. Officials in the Baltics last month called for banning sales of magnesium ore, a key component in steel and alloy production, after Estonian media reported that supplies to Russia had surged, often via Estonian and Latvian ports. Russia has also managed to acquire supplies of nitrocellulose, a compound needed to produce explosives such as artillery shells, according to a report by Ukraine's Center for Defensive Strategies, including from Germany, Taiwan, and China. Whew, that's a mouthful. So, I think we can be a little bit skeptical about what the Russians are claiming, and also it's really important that we stop these raw materials getting to Russia to help them in their construction, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do once they use up all of their easily cannibalizable or refurbishable machines from their existing deep stockpiles. Anyway, that's from the Washington Post. This is from Kyiv Independent. China is a primary contributor to Russia's military-industrial complex. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said at a press conference following a G7 meeting of foreign ministers yesterday. This is a real worry. Like I've said to you a number of times over the last month, my big concern is China's ability to help Russia and getting involved in their military-industrial complex to support the ramping up of weaponry construction and equipment construction to a degree that wasn't foreseeable earlier on in the war, when they didn't have so much overt, didn't have so much Chinese help. Anyway, let me know what you think. Really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.